Hello and welcome back to Dishonored. This is a pointing episode, so it's not going to contain anything from the main game. It's just going to be the books that I've collected over the time. Let's move my TV screen a little bit. Yes, basically this is going to be like Brigmore, which is texts, because it's basically all of them. It's an awful lot. Although I may have read some already, so we'll just see what happens. Anyway, let's carry on. I'm going to read this in like an audio diary format, but basically if you don't want to listen to these, you don't have to, and I'll see you later on. Okay, and so cobbled bits of bone. Excerpt from a journal covering various occult artifacts. They say my mother was a witch, but the truth, as is so often the case, depends on perspective and your place in the world. She relied on poisons made from exotic herbs and blowfish that live in the reef's waters near Penthesilea. Her power originated in hallucinogenics, delivered through guile or by force to those who crossed her. There was an unusual intensity in her gaze for certain, but it came from within, not from the outsider. It's what happens to anyone pushed to the absolute edge of sanity and survival, who stays there for years, then returns to walk among the sheep in so-called civilized society. My mother was crafty, but if it was anything more than powders, hidden knives or guile, I never saw it. Like they tell children, some of those truly touched by the black-eyed bugger can move through the space between rooftops like a sparrow. Others command armies of rats or poisonous flies as easy as they wriggle their fingers and toes. The overseers are right to fear us, to warn the common folk to stay from their homes at night and keep their families close. But there are other ways his influence manifests itself. Those who serve me share in some of what I can do, and I suspect it's the same for Delilah Copperspoon's coven. Then there are those who can craft runes and charms. The old woman across town, they call her Granny Rags. She carves and polishes the bones of whales, stringing them together and opening them to the void until they moan like a fever sick on a cold night. I've found a few of her talismans, and with each one I touched, a tiny piece of me departed and settled in with her. What does she gain? A longer life? Some other kind of power? I don't understand. The making of such things is beyond me. I've known 4 people in my time who've carried the mark of the outsider, but I've known dozens more who wanted it, who stood at night in stagnant ponds and begged with the dust blowing through graveyards, people who gutted farm animals or buried the flesh of men, thinking it would call forth the void. I met a dying man once who had collected runes and charms for years. He crushed them all into powders, made a paste and ate them, thinking he would gain whatever magic was in the things. His death was long and painful. I also knew a woman from Karnaka who would trade for charms and other bits of whalebone. She cracked them apart and fused them back together, then sold them. I bought one of these corrupted charms that she swore would cause sharp metal to break on my skin, and it worked. But each time it did, one of my teeth turned black and fell out. After the 3rd time, I gave it to one of my men. Now when he smiles, it's all bleeding gums, and I wonder what parts inside him are turning black. Sometimes I ask myself, without these gifts, would I be a man to fear? Would I be called the Knife of Dunwall? With my name whispered through the markets and the alleyways, the high towers and drawing rooms? I'd like to think so, but it really doesn't matter. As long as I bear this mark, I'll use whatever craft I have to force my will on the world. The harder trick is undoing what I've done. Regency and emergency powers. In the time of political upheaval, there are provisions in place for a staged transfer of power, designed with 3 goals in mind. The first is to minimization of incentive for coup. There is no predetermined person or position within the government that is scheduled to take on the mantle of regency during a time of crisis. Instead, a regent is chosen by parliamentary accord. This serves to avoid promoting a path of derelict ascendancy and to discourage those who would scheme for such a turn of events. It is the assumption of our governing documents that such a legislative body will always have the wisdom to see through would-be usurpers. The second is the assurance of stability for the commons during and after the transitional phase. During an interregnum, while a regent rules the land, there are categories of laws and degrees that cannot be altered without a majority vote from Parliament. Thus, daily life for the people will not change dramatically when during the time of regency, or shift drastically once a proper heir takes up the throne. Third, and perhaps most important, is that a worthy successor is found. In order to rule out hasty action and to maximise stability, there will be no term limit or duration applied to the period of regency. Historically, rush decisions have been greatly contested, resulting in extended political turmoil or outright conflict. When the proper heir is found and the position is filled by someone worthy of the role, all others will fall in and provide their support. Ports of call, except from a guide to port cities across the Empire of the Isles. Portishead Gristol, a small town from the locals, are charming, and the ale is unmatched. Be certain to visit during the month of winds for their pennant festival. Dunwall Gristol. Notes on the capital city could fill a dozen such volumes. All delights exist in Dunwall if you've got the coin, and all the miseries if you're broke. Unless you're well connected through someone in Dunwall Tower, one of the key families, the City Watch or River Patrol, make sure you permits are in order. Otherwise, you're likely to have your cargo seized by the port authorities for any reason they can contort. Kilkenny Morley. When the harbour master here is particular about the kinds of goods you are carrying, the rest of the town is more lax. Be sure to visit the inn on the rock for the best mutton stew in all the Isles. Tivia. The cold here will snatch the breath from your lungs, but it is met in equal strength by the civility of its well-mannered citizens. The cosy taverns are kept warm by their famously crafted iron stoves. Though the northern food takes some adjustment, bejeweled aristocrats laugh and drink side by side with weathered, leathery-skinned farmers, clapped one another on the back until the dim hours. It is hard to make a friend here, or to truly understand the world-view of the native-born, but once you do, you'll have a friend for life. Calero Soconus. The city is crowded in the warmer months, and for good reason. You will find yourself shoulder to shoulder with scantily clad locals and foreigners on holiday, pale skin burned pink by the sun, which somehow seems larger and brighter in Soconus. The food in Calero is a shining example of Soconan cuisine, and there is always music, always dancing. Hand-rolled on the steps of tobacco shops, the cigars are of course fresher than ones you've had shipped through other parts of the empire. Karnaka Soconus. The jewel of the south at the edge of the world. The city is bristling with industry. After a wave of settlers from Morley and an influx of wealthy trading companies from Dunwall, everywhere you go in Karnaka, there are new ideas, hybrid forms of music, groundbreaking theories of natural philosophy, and even extravagant delicacies made by mixing ingredients from all of the known cultures. The locals work tirelessly for their coin, welcoming the elite from across the Isles. The reclamation of Dunwall, except from a pamphlet published in response to the plague. Dunwall, the seat of power, is the known civilized world. The Empire of the Isles, it is our great capital, and it has been brought low by vermin. The very thought galls. We are forced with the reality that our great city is in such a shambles, and for the few remaining domiciles? In any habitable condition are the estates of those wealthy enough to ward themselves against that reality. A city cannot continue to thrive, population by only the upper classes and the cloistered sycophants. Even if the plague were gone tomorrow, in the present state, Dunwall doesn't have enough hardy people of working age to retain the city to everyday function. We must find a way to attract more residents, which requires removing the cloud of fear brought about by the current regime. The Lord Regent and his lackeys are bad for business, my friends. So it falls on us. A plague and a tyrant must be overcome, and after that we must undertake a third miracle, turning the screws on the obscenely wealthy, forcing them to pay back into the place that has given them their privileged lives. It is the powerful and fortunate who must pay for the rebuilding of Dunwall, even if the protest will hear the stones and timbers of reconstruction on their backs. All this must happen for the dormant machine of commerce to restart. Without that, we are all forfeit, and the greatest city of our age will be lost. The Royal Spymaster. Excerpt from a historical record of government positions and ranks. It is said that the office of the Royal Spymaster has existed for as long as I've had that before. Oh, we haven't had this though. The Knife of Dunwall, A Survivor's Tale. From a street pamphlet containing a sensationalized sighting of the assassin Dowd. Gentle reader, be assured that your coin is well spent today. When you read here may one day preserve your life and your sanity. No one has seen the Knife of Dunwall and lived to tell of it until now. The sun was setting a bloody stain across the sky, silhouetting the noble contours of Roughwild Slaughterhouse. The stench of blood, the flesh of men and whales, scoured the air. Dowd slithered from the sewers, his body slick with gore and crawling with vermin that no mortal man could have tolerated. His shadow stretched out before him on the ground, and it revealed his true nature, a horned thing wrapped by heresy. A shape too terrible to put into words, my gentle readers, a sorcerer from the void, without question. I could hear the moans of the dying workers he left in his wake, and he did not even pause to acknowledge their plight, for his heart is colder than Tyvian ice. Instead, he let out a gutted howl of victory, the shock of which snuffed out the life of those poor dying workers, and then he bounded away, moving from roof to roof back towards the streets. And this was where I thought this chapter would end, until I heard the music. The grinding metal music of the overseers echoed from the nearby alleyways, and I know there would soon be a fight, with only my sense of duty to the fallen citizen of Dunwall to keep my fear from taking me. I inched closer to the mouth of the valley for a better vantage. A brave contingent of overseers had captured one of Dowd's lieutenants lurking in the alley. He or she, for I could not tell beneath the thick leather of the industrial whaler suit, was prone and tied with sturdy ropes, surrounded by overseers, but their fixation was ultimately their undoing. Dowd fell from above, moving them through the air as easily as a falcon. I swear it upon my spirit, without sound he glided down among them, and the music maker was the first to die, as Dowd tore the man's head from his shoulders. The wretched song faded in a discord war. Then I watched as the most notorious assassin of our time became a flurry of leather, metal, and blood. Deflecting bullets and sworn blades with ease, the last overseer, no doubt consumed with terror at seeing his brothers fall so easily, sank to his knees and begged for mercy. Dowd spoke a single word that made his entrails squirm in my belly, and upon hearing it, the overseer shrieked and like a madman until his mask split in two, as though struck by some hammer and chisel, and a stream of blood gushed from the crack, bathing Dowd's boots. I closed my eyes at that point, too overwhelmed to witness any further atrocity. I could only hope that if the foul heretic discovered me next, my life would end swiftly. But when I opened my eyes, Dowd was nowhere to be seen. That was the last I ever saw of the Knife of Dunwall. So heed my warning, gentle reader, should you or anyone you love witness some misshapen shadow fall across your path, or should you hear the slightest rumour of dark words whispered from the rooftops, then flee. Flee with all haste. That's a lie. I didn't kill anyone. Oh. The Metaphysica Mysterium, excerpt from a larger banned work on supernatural ritual. It is said that we should not sully our hands with combating the forces of the void. My studies have been deemed heretical by my brothers, but the rewards have been invaluable. I have harnessed the same energies employed by the outsider and his accursed followers, while avoiding their corruption. I will prescribe a two-fold method in this text. Indirection. As the wholesome powers of the outsider use living flesh as a conduit, we can avoid being tainted by using the flesh of another instead. Containment. By using channels and barriers, we can focus these void energies into a raw state, shielding them from the perverse perspectives of the outsider. The Whalers. Excerpt from a journalist's report on organised criminal activity. One gentleman of advanced age swore his brother had been taken by the Whalers, a notorious gang associated with a man called Dowd. His brother was working with the Royal Spermers and 6 to even his mother nest. Yeah, we've had that before as well. The Isle of Serconus. Excerpt from a volume of Serconan Geography and Culture. Serconus, the jaw of the south, is best known for its warm winds, spiced foods, and endless beaches. While the city of Calero sees the heaviest flow of travellers from across the Isles, Karnaca, on the southernmost edge of the known world, is preferred among the elite of the Empire. It is said that a month spent resting beneath the sun of the beaches of Serconus or within one of the rural villages can cure most maladies. Travellers bring back recipes and styles from the south, and that dances that all Serconans learn in their youth are favoured in Bristol for their sensuality, copied by the fashionable aristocracy in the capital city of Dunwall. The only persistent trouble in Serconus originates among the string of tiny islands stretching away from the mainland to the east. For generations, pirates have hidden among this archipelago, raiding traders passing between the isles, and more recently attacking whaling ships returning with rich stores of oil. Thomas Journal. Our troubles began with an... We had this before? I don't think we've had this before. God, there's so much stuff to read. A recent journal entry, written in a careful hand, I have to read all of these as well because I'm about to do the end of the mission. Our troubles began with a name, Delilah, a mystery given to Dowd by the face he sees in his dreams and whose voice he hears when kneeling at the shrines hidden in the lost parts of the city. None of us have ever heard this voice, but we know its power. It spoke to our master, telling him of his coming doom and saying that solving this riddle was the only way to escape. We know nothing of Delilah except that we found a whaling ship by that name, a tenuous connection, but when the outsider's word is concerned, there is no coincidences. We discovered the ship was named after a woman who once walked the halls of Dunwall with Jasmine Caldwin. Later she became a painter, an apprentice of Sokolov himself, until she snared an aristocrat patron named Arnold Timsh. We met with Timsh's niece, who offered us information on Delilah in exchange for eliminating her uncle. Removing aristocrats was our speciality, so our master agreed. With Barrister Arnold Timsh gone, his niece divulged everything she knew. Delilah was much more than a painter, and she was hiding in the old Brigmore manor outside the city. But by then we were too late. Delilah anticipated our threat. For some time she had been working her corruptive influence on the best of us, the assassin Billy Lurk. Delilah turned Lurk against us, and together they sold us out to the overseers. When we returned to our hideout in the flooded district, we were swarmed by gold masks and hounds. But Dowd is quick and wise in our trade. In the end he kept us alive, though there were losses. Now our resources are strained. Some of the men are grumbling. I see the strain on Dowd's face, killing the Empress, handing over her daughter. These are not easy burdens to bear, and Lurk's betrayal weighs on him heavily. His sleep is troubled by curses and shouts. Now we make preparations to strike back at Delilah. She is planning something in Brigmore, something that affects everyone on the Isles, and she will be expecting us. Like our master, she shares her gifts from the outsider with those who follow her. How many are they, I wonder? I have no secrets from my master. My loyalty is without question, but I fear these may be the last days of the Whalers, perhaps the last days of Dowd. Oh, Thomas. You are not only one of my favourite assassins, you are amazing as well. Now, I think we've had that. Haven't had this one, though. The sewers beneath Dunwall. Excerpt from a light historical overview of the architecture of Dunwall. Across the generations, the aqueducts and tunnels beneath the city of Dunwall have served a variety of purposes. In the earliest days of the city's history, several primary canals were used to channel river overflow during times of flooding. And for a time, it was fashionable for wealthy aristocrats to commission underground water passages, giving them access to their estates from the Wrenhaven River and its minor tributaries. Over the years, these tunnels began to interconnect, sometimes by design and sometimes by accident. The history of the tunnel system is rich, as every school child is taught rebels and the sewers extensively during the Morley insurrection. As discussed in popular bar songs, lovers often find privacy in some of the cleaner entry points, with fresh air brought in by the winds from the river itself. On a dark note, in addition to seeing traffic from gangs and smugglers, it is rumoured that the current royal spymaster himself, Hiram Burrows, has a network of informants who know the twists and turns of the sewer system by heart. Until recent times, the older tunnels suffered from a reputed collapse, creating sinkholes that occasionally consumed entire street corners. The current system rarely suffers from such calamity, since the sewers were reinforced and expanded by the city planning department during the rule of Emperor Uhor Cauldron I. Okay, procedures following the escape of Corvo Etano, except from the case study intended for prison wardens. Following the escape of Corvo Etano, the council appointed by the Lord Regent has decided it is of the utmost importance to increase security measures at Coldridge Prison. The recommendations made by this report include structural measures such as increasing the heights of walls, sealing ventilation shafts, and ensuring sewer entrances are inaccessible. Additionally, staffing at the site must be increased to thoroughly cover all exits and maintain observation of all major corridors. Special amendment. In addition to the new measures attained herein, the council will construct both the Abbey of the Everyman and Royal Physician Anton Sokolov, who is also head of the Academy of Natural Philosophy, asking for guidance and equipment in the handling of those cases which are more exotic in nature. We will have dismayed reports of the supernatural in the past as old wives' tales and lunatic heresy. Recent months have convinced us that these are matters afoot that we do not fully understand. As such, prison executive personnel are encouraged to welcome the presence of both the overseers and anyone working under Sokolov's technical guidance. Modern incarceration technology. Excerpt from a presentation at the onset of the plague. Once again, I have been asked to solve the problems of the dismal past, and once again I have delivered the solutions required by our present situation. As with all my work, it is simply that a mind capable of understanding these potential is required, for the benefit of the Lord Regent and to the deterrent of those incarcerated at Coldridge Prison with an aptitude for escape. I have recently adapted one of my inventions for deployment in the dank and depressing place. The potential function of these devices at the prison should now be clear to all. Following the latest round of testing, with the associated power complications resolved, I have therefore recommendations of 2-stage implements starting at once. The first stage involves a recent device simply to deploy, designed to stun the escaping prisoner. The second is a more powerful deterrent, the lethal and increasing popular arc pylon. Its combination, properly applied, these devices will make Coldridge Prison inescapable. Right, bear with me, I just need to start this video again. Continuing on then. So how many have we got left? Modern incarceration technologies. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 18. It's quite a lot. We shall have a little look, see what happens. Oh god, where is it? Here we go. Sokolov Technologies and the New Age. Excerpt from a recent book detailing Sokolov machines. One of the advantages of Sokolov's technologies is that they share the same magnetic socket for the tanks of processed whale oil that are used as fuel. When a tank is exhausted, another can be plugged into place with ease. And the process is simple enough that any common workman or even the lower guardsman of the City Watch can handle this task. This applies to the arc pylon and wall of light security systems, as well as the powered carriages used for transport by those few who are worthy enough to afford them. The only obvious downside of Sokolov's designs is the velocity of the tanks themselves. A few incidents have occurred, resulting in damage by property or bodily harm whenever one of the tanks has exploded. The History of Draper's Ward. Excerpt from the District of Dunwall, a recent book. This chapter will focus on the once lavish Draper's Ward. Before the reign of the Coldwin dynasty, the locale held none of the prestige that it has so recently enjoyed. Draper's Ward was once a simple manufacturing hub for fabrics and textiles, exporting raw weaves to all corners of the empire. Water-driven mills turned day and night to meet the needs of the rapidly expanding cloth industries. For decades, Draper's Ward supported a modest trade until key manufacturers began relocating factories to Serconis and Morley. The price of labour in these places was much lower, and the limited availability of Dunwall riverfront property, which was required to turn the mills, made expansion of operations impossible. At the end of this period, declining productions and abandoning factories created an opportunity for a new generation of skilled and ambitious industrialists. A loose confederation of clothing merchants, including such luminaries as Percy Oliver, Agatha Chesery and Mortimer Hatt, established a new model of business, high-end clothing that was designed to appeal to Dunwall's elite, sold at a substantial markup. The best sartorial designers from across the empire were lured to the boutiques of Draper's Ward, where they found themselves freed from the need to solicit patrons. In fact, they were elevated to high society, courted and pampered. The powerful and influential began to frequent the new Draper's Ward, paying any cost to be seen in the latest styles. The district was wildly successful, extravagant wealth and luxury among the proprietors and designers became the norm. But not all was glamour and fun. Reinventing Draper's Ward was an expensive project, and investigations into the sources of capital funding this revitalization often led to dead ends. It was commonly whispered that Mortimer Hatt had been a ruthless gang leader in his early years, and it was a very poor secret among the City Watch that he still commanded a private army of hardened men that would protect his interests. A terrible truth emerged over time, with the designers and merchants held court in exclusive boutiques. The mills and factories that produced the clothing were houses of suffering and abuse. Despite the coin generated by their business, the workers who stitched the garments never took part in the flow of wealth. Instead, Hatt's men enforced brutality working conditions on them. As this corruption intensified, the violence occasionally spilling out into the open streets, the well-to-do declined further invitations to shop at the boutiques. Business fell precariously, and now, with rumours of a plague looming on the horizon, the golden age of the Draper's Ward may soon be at an end. Admiralty and the Fleet. Excerpt from a book on naval history. With each of the isles has some form of naval fleet. None is more envied than that of Bristol. With its long, proud history of great ships and the admirals who command them, boys came of age in the city of Crystal, hoping to someday captain such a ship. And family dynasties are made by those captains who track down infamous pirates or crush seditious uprisings, as during the Morley insurrection. In times of war and peace, Crystal continued to innovate at sea. The ship designs of Anton Sokolov himself now represent the highest standard of the whaling trade, allowing crews to haul their keel up over the deck and began their butchery and processing. Even as the ship returns to Dunmore, the crews can be seen working on their latest whale as the ship moves slowly up the Wrenhaven River. Coming to dock with one of the most powerful warehouse companies, such as the Greaves Whaling House, suspended in the rigging overhead and backlit by the setting sun, the silhouettes of those of the creatures makes a moving sight as it cruises into its final resting place in the industrial heart of the capital city. Trimble's coin, except from a book on noteworthy intellectual figures. The halls of the Academy of Natural Philosophy are thought to be spaces where thoughtful discourse and enlightened tolerance set the tone for debate and learning. It is believed that reason applies above all, and the passions of the greatest minds of the Empire are temporarily tempered by wisdom and custom. This is commonly accepted vision of the place, and it is most always accurate. Almost. Sometimes a protracted debate or disagreement can exploit into conflict, and very rarely violence. Such was the case years ago in the month of Winds. A young apprentice named Piero Joplin ventured into strange new directions of research in the preservation of mortifying tissue, a field that brought him into frequent conflict with the student called Trimble. Joplin and Trimble often debated loudly long into the night, and the content of these arguments was well beyond the understanding of most people of the Empire, the author included. The rivalry between the two natural philosophers raged for months, but it was the climax of these events that prompts this writing. The two had argued deep into the night, the debate sliding into bitter personal attacks. At last they reached a terrible accord. Their mutual hatred culminated in a duel to the death with pistols. Under the grey sky of dawn, the greatest minds of the Empire of the Isles gathered in the courtyard in a fashion resembling schoolboys gathering to watch the bullies fight. A quiet fell as Joplin and Trimble accepted the ceremonial pistols, marked off the paces, and turned and fired. Each combatant fired round after round, shattering windows, chipping masonry, and spilling plaster. The closest shot to the mark was Joplin's, whose bullet ripped through the hem of Trimble's overcoat. It was clear that the dedicated study of the learned man had made for poor marksmanship. With all their ammunition was expended, both parties stood quivering with fear and rage, but unharmed. It was then agreed that the duel would be settled with a coin flip. A newly minted coin of the Empire was produced, bearing the face of Empress Jessamine Coldwin, and it was sent spinning into the air. Trimble called heads, the coin landed tails. Joplin was declared winner, and the feuding between the men ceased, but the terms of the dispute, Trimble was forced to leave the Academy, his studies left incomplete, whereupon a dignified silence returned to the halls of the Academy of Natural Philosophy. The Rat Plague, excerpt from a natural philosopher's notes. For over a year I studied the cursed plague, collecting and dissecting rats by the thousand. Given their rapid gestation and maturation cycle, it has been possible to breed them for numerous generations. The rodents themselves seem immune to the plague, but they pass it readily between members of their own species, perhaps through mites. The blood of the rats tells his own story, allowing me to gauge the number of generations that a given group of rats have lived with the plague. As such, a nagging question remains. The rats collected in the poorest parts of the town and in the slums exhibit the oldest strain of the plague, while those found at the docks, where the foreign plague-bearing rats would presumably have entered our city, exhibit a younger strain of plague. Could this mean that the rats were transported to the slums in some way that is not obvious? I will continue my research. If nothing else, I am living proof that Sokolov Elixir and Pietro's remedy are very effective at protecting against the plague, if one consumes enough of this stuff. A History on Lizzie Stride, excerpt from a listing of known underworld elements. Little is known of Elizabeth Stride's origins, except that she hailed from Morley, rumoured to be the daughter of a seamstress and a travelling cloth merchant. Stride was forced to flee Morley in her early years after strangling an abusive schoolmaster. She smuggled herself out of the city disguised as a boy and became a powder monkey on a navy ship. The ruse worked for a time, allowing her to see wonders and horrors that women in her society had always been denied. Her high spirit, charisma and fierceness propelled her to the top of the pecking order in a small ship-bound community of children, and they grew loyal to her. Inevitably, her deception was discovered by the ship's surgeon when she was injured during a storm. Before the doctor could report her, she rallied her powder monkeys to toss the men overboard. A bloody fight ensued, but their brief mutiny was crushed by many of her followers were put down. In the chaos, Lizzie and a handful of her loyal boys managed to abandon ship in a skiff. Afterwards, they found employment for a few seasons with a cartographer working along the coast of the Penthesilea continent to map estuaries. There, the crew of children grew into experienced and savage fighters. With the conclusion of the mapping expedition, the crew sailed back to Bristol. Once in Dunwall, Lizzie and her hardened friends carved a space for themselves in the street culture of the city. The nautical experience had them at home on the Wrenhaven River, a territory previously unclaimed by any gang. They recruited former sailors, pirates, and defectors from the other gangs. She took an unlikely lover, a naval aristocrat that arranged for her to carry merchant marine papers, giving them legitimacy in the eyes of the government and allowing her to sail through territory normally restricted to merchants. Some of those same powder monkeys from the early years still follow her, helping pilot their cargo boat, the Undine, up and down the Wrenhaven on smuggling missions. As the leader of the Dead Eels, Lizzie has an almost mythical reputation for ferocity. She files her teeth to points, and is even rumoured to have webbed toes. Her enemies fear her unpredictable violence as much as they despise her. The effects of whale oil on the gastric humours, Volume 1. Excerpt from a Natural Philosopher's Notes on the effects of whale oil on gestational function. On behalf of the plague of the... One benefit of this plague is the abundance of unclaimed bodies readily available to the inquisitive medical mind. I have been able to stimulate gastric function in addition to other organ activity through infusions of whale oil and the application of electrical impulses. I believe that such treatments could be applied to the living and that it might prolong life indefinitely. When my process is applied to the stomach and intestine systems, digestion does in fact still occur, though the end product must be evacuated from the stomach through tubing and processed by my machinery before being recirculated to the appropriate organs. This was a tricky solution to come across, as my first inclination was to break the food down myself and bypass the natural processes altogether. My subject has indicated that he no longer has a sense of taste, but that might be a mercy given what I'm feeding him these days. Was this taken from Mr. Hat and the guy? The effects of whale oil on the gastric humours, Volume 2. Excerpt from a Natural Philosopher's Notes on the effects of whale oil on gestational function. My primary patient is no longer mobile. A loss of bone density coupled with the amount of organ maintenance that I have to perform on a daily basis means that he will be bound to a chair or bed for a foreseeable future. While this greatly agitated the subject at first, he quickly grew too fatigued to offer further protest. I cleared a room close to my lab, but with access to the mill so he could continue to give orders. Update: after 3 weeks of regressive, the yellowish sores have reappeared around implantation site C. I was holding out hope for full recovery, as the highest concentration of whale oil was pumped into the site in particular. Oh my god, that's crazy. Machinery repurposing guide, except for machinery manual number 7. Rigger mounting and unmounting. Remove the cover over the primary gear and set it aside. Remove the primary gear and replace it with a secondary gear from the alternative drive system. Manufacture and place dual counterbalance weights along the alternative drive system axle and unlink the dampening cells at both ends. Remove and set aside and slide arm from the regulatory support. Open the side arm pistol shaft and remove the pistons. Reshape the slide arm pistons to the specifications and reapply lubricant before closing the housing. Install the elongated slide arm into the regular support. Adjust the reverse spacer bolt and the junction between the alternative drive system axle and the new elongated slide arm until the interval suits the new application. What the flip was that? Petals and Thorns. Excerpt from a children's book. In the verdant garden, kneeling quietly, Rosalind and her basket attended a gathering of crown roses. Rosalind bent, caressing one of the roses, and she brought the shears from behind her back, where they were hidden, as if she might spook the flowers. It was but a small thing to take a life for her mother. As she brought the shears around, she pulled at a stem, readying it for the blades, but the flower did not comply, and rewarded her trust with a thorn buried in her thumb. A single drop of crimson welled up from the wound. Before Rosalind could bring her thumb to her lips, a hand closed around her wrist. Her mother was standing here by, witness to all that transpired. The rose demands its price, my love. Do not deny the flower its toll. Rosalind winced as her mother's forced her hand out over the flower bed and gently squeezed her thumb. 3 drops squatted onto the dry soil. As her mother walked away, Rosalind blinked away tears and gripped tight her shears. She left the garden with a basket brimming, 3 crimson drops and 1 crimson flower, all that remained of the once proud garden. The art of the enchanting garden. Effective garden design must entice the casual observer by drawing them through the garden gates with a promise of the idyllic. Yet once inside, it must continue to captivate the senses, compelling visitors to linger among lush greenery and well-positioned decor. The tranquility of a solitary pool, the perfume of jasmine flowers, the drape of an ancient woody clematis across the estates of Dunwall. All of these must serve to soothe and beguile those who adventure into the well-tended garden of our gentry. Except from book on landscaping. Whether one chooses manicured symmetry of the illusion of wild growth, certain fundamentals must always apply. Variations of shape and size to excite the vision, cohesive themes to calm the spirit, and complementary scents and colours. As noted in the high-walled gardens of Lord and Lady Mortimer Plough, place marble sculpture throughout as a means of transporting the visitor to a world of imagination, in keeping with the influence vision set forth by the beloved Borungarn sisters, daughters of the late Jonathan and Olivia Sutter, and to those visiting your manor garden with coherent sounds, the soft splash of the fountain, the trickling of a stone-walled stream, and the rustle of Saconan sheaf oaks from high above. Remember, a magical meeting place can be as simple as periwinkle draped bower over a crunching gravel pathway, or a pedestal bench nestled under the boughs of a crown willow. Rhyme of the Rosewater Hag. Oh, look at that. We can do this. Rhyme of the Rosewater Hag, excerpt from an almanac on folk tales and superstitions of Bristol. So far in his almanac we have catalogued many trite and ignorant, if somewhat harmless, tales, but we must now turn to this special case of folk customs that can only be called wicked and pernicious. The worst of these is perhaps the Rhyme of the Rosewater Hag. Variants of this accustomed poem seem to predate even the founding of Dunwall, though its ultimate origins are lost to us. As to its meaning, some consider it a tale of revenge by a mother against her own daughter, others see it as a supplication meant to solicit the attention of some ancient spirits from the void. In any case, the ritual surrounding the poem is profusely morbid, and in many regions is used as a primitive means of setting the matter between two parties when one has accused the other of falsehood. It is performed as follows. First, whoever is to be tested must find a fountain of standing water and cover the surface with fallen rose petals. Once there are sufficient petals as to completely obscure the water, you must close your eyes firmly and place both hands on the water so that they are submerged beneath a blanket of rose petals. Then you are to recite the following verses. The Rosewater Hag. Petals, petals on the water. Tell me, what's your daughter? Where's your daughter? Has she drowned beneath the mark? Has she vanished in the dark? Petals, petals on the water. Tell me, where's your daughter? Has she trusted by the well? Has she secrets left to tell? Petals, petals on the water. Tell me, am I your daughter? After this, you must lean into the fountain, lowering your head fully into water, and under the rose petals, face first with both eyes still squeezed tight. Count to 3 and then open your eyes. At that moment, it is said that the Rosewater Hag will arrive. If you are without fault, you will see nothing except that you will feel her gentle caress on the back of your neck. But if there is falsehood and wickedness in your heart, then you will see the horrible face of the Rosewater Hag, a creature of indescribable horror. The hag will drown you in the fountain with a cord made of thorny vines. Obviously, while the Abbey takes things very seriously, most authorities classify this tale as superstitious nonsense. However, it must be noted that every year there are at least half a dozen reports from the countryside of young women found dead and blue-faced, with their necks nicked and scratches as if by a collar of thorns. Spirit of the deep, sirens of the deep. I walked for hours along the coast, leaving Dunwall behind me until the lament of the waves drowned all other feeling. I wept, knowing you would not come to me, my love. You rule my dreams, where I behold with senses I do not possess in waking life, the darker splendour of your home in the deep. There the ocean rests on your back, like a sleeping child on his father's shoulders. In the sleepless nights of despair, you disappear. You appear to me not as the mighty Leviathan, but as a young man with eyes as black as the void. Oh. I could do a bit more. Delilah's journal. Now that the painting's finished, I've had that before. The Howl from Beyond. Excerpt from a work of fiction by P.J. Stokeworth. As Gregory and Elia crouched by the dark of the upper hall, they could hear the thing drawing close. It had followed them from the forest through the garden and into the house. Now, as they leaned against the wall, exhausted and terrified, they could hear it coming up the stair. Moving slowly, it scraped along, exposed bone dragging across wood and carpet. A ragged panting foretold its passage, as dead air was pushed through a throat eaten away with rot. Reaching a grim conclusion, Elia swallowed. Her face went slack, and she gave Gregory a final glance before plunging through the window glass into the moonlight and night air. At the sound of her delicate body smashing against the cobblestone below, Gregory let out a keening moan, and as he did, his voice was matched by an unearthly howl from the stairwell, and that rapid scratching of clawed feet rushing up toward him. The Fugue Feast. At the end of every year, after the last day of the month of songs, we begin the Fugue Feast. The new year has not started, and thus the time that follows is outside the calendar. A period of celebration and feasting begins, during which the people abandon the very practice that keep them whole and healthy over the year. Many leave their homes euphoric with spirits or potent herbs. Some paint their faces or wear masks to conceal themselves as they pursue their passions without reservation. When the right cosmological signs are observed, and it is time for the calendars to begin anew, the sitting high overseer calls for the hymn of atonement, and the Fugue Feast ends. Families return to their homes, with wives to their husbands, enemies put down their weapons, and fires are extinguished. No complaint is given to those who have wronged others, deviated from ancient codes, or discarded oaths. From this time during the astrological alignment does not exist and is not recorded. The following day starts the new year, marked by the first day of the month of Earth, as it has always been. And we've got two more. Daughter of Tivia. Excerpt from a theatre play. Young Lady Amelia in the back garden. Duchess, I do not know of the world beyond these garden walls, but I do not mistake my lack of experience for fear, or for an absence of desire. If I avoided you, it is because of the waning your name carries. Duchess Kali, bending a rose to her face, inhaling the scent. And what warning is that, my dear Amelia? Young Amelia, turning her back on the Duchess. I believe you know my meaning. Your father's tales are still the subject of prior gossip. Duchess Kali, stepping up close. And do your stories excite you? Tell me, girl. I am a friend. Young Lady Amelia, hesitating. Duchess Kali, Yes, I confess that they do. In my youth, I hid a copy of the tales of Prince Kalasar. I read them late in the night. Duchess Kali, speaking to her ear. As did I. Young Lady Amelia, leaning back into her embrace. But he was your father. Duchess Kali, stroking her neck. They're just stories, Amelia. Fire for the imagination. Young Lady Amelia, breathing deeply. Duchess, will you teach me to kiss? Duchess Kalia, cooing softly. I will. But have you never kissed another? Abri, a rose gardener, emerging from the heights, stammered. My ladies, I swear to you, I did not intend to spy. Forgive me, but I was prudent in the hedge, and could not wait to find a way to interrupt. Duchess Kali, extending a hand. We forgive you, but as punishment, I command you to stay and to come closer. Young Lady Amelia, shocked brows furrowed in irritation. But here's a servant, Duchess. Duchess Kali, pulling at each of them, allowing them close to her. And serve as he will, young Amelia. The Shadow of Bitterleaf, except from a longer work of fiction. Finding my way by the feeble light of the dying fire, I saw her working. A large needle moved in her hand, following precise esoteric patterns, knots and loops of seamstress craft from ancient days. Beneath her needle, his body clenched and shuddered, shaking the wooden table. A morbid fascination pushed me closer as she turned her blank face towards me, resting the needle in his flesh. With that rueful tone she addressed me. So you are the lover, I presume. You too have been unfaithful, and it is now your turn to be mended. Ooh. Anyway, that's a very long pointing episode, but now we're up to date. Shouldn't be another one of this, it should be the last pointing episode, because I think we're about to finish the game, but we'll find out very soon. I'll see you guys in the next adventure.